Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about what is next for the Sacramento Kings, because this is going to be a really interesting offseason for them. They have a good amount of young talent, but they also have some salary cap stuff that they need to deal with moving forward. So I'm excited to go ahead and talk about the future of the Kings in today's video. But really quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then subscribing to the channel is a great way to keep up with all the videos that I post every single week, and leaving a like rating also helps out the video a ton. With that said, let's go and get started. Okay, so as of this week, the Sacramento Kings have missed the playoffs for the 14th consecutive season. This is a team that has really struggled to find any kind of sustainable success for a really long time. And this time last year, we were able to interact with other human beings in public, which was nice. But a lot of people, including myself, thought that the Kings were potentially an up-and-coming team after an almost 40-win season last year, which doesn't sound like a ton relative to some other teams. But when you're talking about the Kings specifically, that's a really good season. However, this season, as you can tell by the fact that they missed the playoffs for the 14th straight year, was a bit of a step back for this team and certainly a disappointment. And some dumbass... I've never actually cursed on this channel, and it almost happened right there. Anyway, somebody before the season thought that a 40-42 record prediction for the Sacramento Kings was actually too low. Wait, I'm actually wearing the same shirt in this video, coincidentally, as I was when I recorded that one. And I would definitely put more stock in the Kings making the playoffs this year than I would the Mavs, at least right now. Wait, I said that I thought they'd have better playoff odds than the Mavs? Oh my, okay, you guys, you can go ahead and unsub. Don't actually, but if you wanted to, I wouldn't blame you. So anyway, the Kings. This year was a disappointment for them. And one thing that definitely comes to mind here when you're talking about the Kings and the season that they had is why they felt the need to fire their head coach after last season when they had the best year that they'd had from a record standpoint since all the way back in 2006. In this entire 14-year run, at the time it was 13 years, that they hadn't made the playoffs. Last year was the best record they had, and they decided to fire their coach anyway. And I don't want to put, the disappointment and a bit of a fallback for this team this season. I don't want to put all of that on Luke Walton as the coach, because obviously, the players have to play better. It's not all on the coach. But I do have some issues with how they played this season relative to last year, because the big thing about the Kings last year that made them an exciting and an up-and-coming team, and a team that people were talking about and paying attention to, was the fact that they played at such a fast pace and how good their offense was. They had Buddy Hield, they had De'Aaron Fox, they played in a style that benefited the way that those guys wanted to play, and they really got up and down the court. They had one of the better offenses in the league, they had one of the fastest paces in the league, and yes, they were awful defensively, but they were starting to work towards a bit of an identity, which is a huge deal for a team that has had such little success over the years as the Kings have had. But then when you fast forward to this season with Luke Walton as the coach, they've slowed down their game a lot. They have a really low pace, especially compared to last year. Their offense has suffered as a result. And yes, the defense has picked up a little bit, but I'd much rather establish an identity for a young team that's had such limited success and then work on the defense stuff rather than go back and forth with different coaches and then go with a completely different play style this year rather than what they had last year. And I think that's what leads to a lot of the frustration that we saw at times in Sacramento this season. And again, I would just go back to don't change the coach when you've had one of the most successful seasons that you've had in years, but you can't go back and change that now. So now let's go ahead and move on and talk about some of the players specifically on this roster. So I'm really just going to talk about the important guys here. I'm not going to go through the entire 14-man roster. The first guy, of course, to talk about is De'Aaron Fox. I love De'Aaron Fox. I understand that as a team, they didn't have a great year, but I still think that he is a potential All-NBA caliber point guard moving forward. He has the athleticism, the speed to get to the rim, continues to work on his jump shot, continues to be more efficient as a playmaker and as a scorer. I have zero concerns about De'Aaron Fox on the offensive end of the court, whether it was this year or last year. I think he's going to be a great player. Now, defensively, it can kind of come and go for him a little bit. He definitely has the ability to be a good defender because of the quickness, because of the length. He has really good hands. Whether that's going to be something he's going to prioritize moving forward, I don't know, but I still love De'Aaron Fox. I don't have any concerns about him. However, his backcourt partner in Buddy Hield is in kind of a weird situation, right? Because he actually ended up coming off the bench for a good amount of the season, and then the Kings started playing better when he was coming off the bench. They've got other guys that can play make, so they don't really need his playmaking as much. He's one of the best shooters in the league, though, when you're looking at volume and percentage. The question is going to be, what's the fit moving forward for him in Sacramento? Does he fit well alongside De'Aaron Fox, specifically on the defensive end? Because I think offensively, they're certainly a good fit. But on the defensive end, is that going to work long-term for this team, or would it be better to find a bit more of a two-way player that that can also shoot to play alongside De'Aaron Fox. Obviously, everybody wants those types of players, so it's going to be difficult to find. But this is probably the one guy that I think has the biggest question mark over him right now is Buddy Hield. And we'll talk a little bit more a little bit later about kind of where they're going to go with him. Next up to talk about is Bogdan Bogdanovic, a player that is going to be a free agent this offseason, has had a really interesting kind of up and down tenure with the team. I think he's a talented player, can shoot, can score, can play make a little bit as well. And his free agency is going to be something to keep an eye on. The Kings want to keep him apparently, but once you get into the salary cap stuff, you'll see that it makes it a little bit more difficult moving forward. I made a video about this a while ago based off some of the things that they did last offseason. But regardless, I like Bogdanovic, but I'm going to talk a little bit more again about him once we get to the free agency section. The next guy, though, is so critical to this team moving forward, and it's Marvin Bagley. And this weird thing kind of happened with Marvin Bagley when I was talking about the 2018 NBA draft, because I really liked Wendell Carter Jr., and I thought that he was kind of being discounted as an athlete because of how great of an athlete Marvin Bagley was and is. I didn't agree with Bagley going second overall, and people kind of thought that meant that I didn't like Marvin Bagley. I still think he's a good player, and like athletically, he's incredible, and he has such, great size. He's huge, and he has some skills as well that he can continue to develop. And if he becomes the kind of player that the Kings thought that he would be, that but that kind of forced their hand, in their opinion, to take him above guys like Luka Doncic, that changes everything for this team. It's a similar situation to DeAndre Ayton for the Phoenix Suns out of the same draft class. If those guys develop into high caliber All-NBA level bigs, that changes a lot of things. And obviously this guy needs to stay healthy, he needs to stay on the floor. I still think he has all the talent and potential in the world. It's just whether or not he actually fulfills it for this team. And it's going to be a huge X factor for their future. And then last up, I did want to talk about Richaun Holmes as well. Had a great season in the absence of some of the other bigs on this roster. Had a kind of a breakout season for him. He's going to be an upcoming free agent here pretty soon. I would caution against paying him too much, because I think a lot of the value that Holmes provides is because he is one of those low cost five men that give you about 80% of what one of the, the high level, highly paid big guys gives you. And I think that is part of his value, is that he is cheap. So I would caution against that. But as an energy big, as a rebounder, as a finisher at the rim, great player to have in a roster. And I like the fact that he's there in Sacramento. And to be completely honest, nobody else on the Kings roster really interests me all that much. I mean, we could talk about Harry Giles for a few minutes if we wanted to, but I'm going to move on to the free agency stuff. So as of right now, for the summer of 2020, the Kings are at about right around $20 million in salary cap space, but in reality, that's not true, because they still have cap holds for Harry Giles as well as Bogdanovic. And those are really, Bogdanovic specifically is really the big guy to pay attention to here for their offseason. Now, if it was up to me, I would love to keep him if I was a Kings fan, or if I was in the front office. I love having guys like that have the versatility to play on or off the ball, very similar to the other Bogdanovic in Utah that we've kind of seen how critical he's been to their success this year, and obviously with Indiana as well and a couple of other teams in the past. The ability to play on or off the ball, to be an above average playmaker when you need a guy, especially in the second unit, playing with bench players to create for others, or that can just play with the starters and shoot well off the ball. That's such a valuable thing to have. And as long as the price doesn't get too crazy, I would really prioritize bringing Bogdanovic back. Honestly, at a certain point, I think I'd rather have Bogdanovic than I would Buddy Hield, just because of the context of the Hield situation and the frustration there at times with the coaching staff and things like that. I think I would rather kind of move on from Hield and keep Bogdanovic. If that's kind of the one-to-one trade that comes up where it's like you have to choose one or the other, I would rather have Bogdanovic. Now, Giles, on the other hand, is a really interesting case, because we've been waiting on a Harry Giles breakout for a couple of years now. Really talented high school player that had a shortened career at Duke due to injury, has had some struggles staying on the floor, whether it be because of just getting minutes or because of injury at the NBA level. He has a couple of really good skill sets. He's still a good athlete. He's fluid. He has great body control. He can really pass the basketball as well, but he hasn't extended his range to the three-point line, and he's not big enough to be a full-time five, and this team already has plenty of guys that can play full-time at the five. So I wouldn't bank on the Kings really being all that motivated to bring him back, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he went somewhere else and had a bit of a bounce back to his career at a different spot, because I do think that he is a talented player. Now, as that relates to their cap space and free agency stuff moving forward, they're going to have significant cap space in the summer of 2021, but De'Aaron Fox is going to need a new extension. And that's what you start kind of running into for this Kings team, is you first look at their payroll and it's like, oh, $20 million, they can improve the team. Oh, wait, they need to bring back Bogdanovic, ideally. Then you get to 2021, same thing. Fox needs an extension. The year after that, Bagley needs an extension. And what that means is year after year after year after year, there's not going to be any significant salary cap space on this roster as it's currently constructed for a very, very long time. So basically what that means is, barring a trade, this is the roster that you have, other than a trade or getting a higher draft pick, which could potentially be in play for this offseason. So what that means is there's a couple of paths moving forward for this team. You can either trade Hield or Bogdanovic or Bagley, put together some kind of trade package, maybe your pick as well, to bring in a star, a guy that you think fits extremely well alongside De'Aaron Fox and can provide you enough lift to be able to get to the postseason and have some success. If that's what you're prioritizing, is just being a playoff team in the West, that is certainly an option. The other part of this is you could keep Fox and you could blow up the entire rest of the roster. You probably want to keep Bagley in this scenario, but you would, trade away Hield or Bogdanovic or your pick or Harrison Barnes or whoever, and try and start building towards the future, and then having some of that salary cap space left over and kind of building from there. The problem with that is Fox and Bagley are going to need extensions. So basically you're completely resetting, and you'll probably end up right back where you are right now in a couple of years, or you can kind of keep things the same and hope that there's some internal improvement. And if none of those options sound all that exciting, it's because they're not, and because that's just where the Kings are right now. Unless there's some big internal improvement from their young players. I'm already projecting for internal improvement from De'Aaron Fox, but really Bagley is the key here, because I don't think Bogdanovic or Hield are getting that much better moving forward, and they don't really have the ability to do that for their roster overall in free agency. And so unless they get a huge draft pick or Bagley develops, this is going to kind of be where they're at. So basically, let's just say I was in charge here. I would stand pat for the most part. I would try and bring back Bogdanovic on something in the 10 to 13 to $14 million range, depending on the context of this offseason with a salary cap and stuff like that. We don't know where that's going to land at, like I talked about in the Raptors video, but somewhere in that range I think is fair because of the skill set that he provides. I wouldn't be too sad to see Harry Giles go, again, just because of the situation of this team. They have plenty of bigs as it is. And then from there, I would play out a season and potentially have the option of trading someone like Buddy Hield or maybe even Bogdanovic, depending on the offer, at the trade deadline to either help me push for the playoffs or to help break the team back down, depending on where I'm at mid-season. But I wouldn't make any huge changes this offseason, because I do think it's still possible that Marvin Bagley comes out and has a great year next year, and that changes everything for this team. So essentially, they're on like a 9-month probation plan right now, where they got to kind of figure out what they have on their roster, what they do or do not want to trade. And if there's enough internal improvement, they can keep rolling with this group. And if there's not, they got to kind of reset and build around Fox and maybe Bagley as well, because that's just kind of where the Kings are at right now. And regardless, at the end of the day, I'm much lower now on the Kings than I thought I would be at the end of the season last year. If you're projecting out a year, I definitely didn't think that this would be where we are, as you could tell by the fact that I thought that they would make the playoffs or at least be better than 40 wins this season. Unfortunately, that's just not how it worked out for the Kings. And yes, there's injuries in play here and stuff like that, but they've just got to be better. From a coaching standpoint, their players need to develop. From a front office standpoint, they need to hit on some draft picks. And if they don't, they're not going to sniff the playoffs for a very, very long time. And they could, reach almost 20 years without a postseason appearance if they don't figure some things out quickly. But again, Bagley is the key here. And yeah, there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.